Today we're stepping into the war room and we're doing a little bit of matchmaking. We're building the ideal UFC 314, 15, and 16. Those are going to be the April, May, and June pay-per-view cards of this year. I did this video concept with the 3, 11, 12, and 13 cards, but I went a little bit too much on the dream side of things, more so than being realistic. Not to say that we can't build a stacked pay-per-view card and have that be something crazy unrealistic, but we're going to be finding that sweet in between. We're going to be building a card that is stacked, but also realistic, all right? I'm looking at you, Uncle Dana. Let's book this shit. So, jumping into it with UFC 314, this is going to be taking place in Miami, Florida, I believe. So, getting into this, the featured prelim of this, I'm going to be doing obviously 5 main card slots and then 1 featured prelim for each of these cards, by the way. So, getting into the featured prelim for this one, Marcus McGee versus Peyton Talbot. Now, I will say that after Talbot's going to go out there and probably whoop Ronnie Barcelos at 311, I would have liked to probably see him face somebody else unranked before getting a spot into the rankings. But when I was booking this matchup and I was trying to look for someone to book against Talbot, I couldn't resist. This is a banger of a matchup. It's a perfect entry to get Talbot into the rankings if he's able to get past McGee. And on paper, this is a fantastic fight. It's 2 high finishers. It's 2 young upcoming prospects. Well, I know McGee's already like fucking 80, but we're doing a prospect versus prospect matchup to battle it out to who can kind of get that 14 and 15 spot, whatever it may be in the rankings. It's a great fight to put both guys on the map. I know Talbot is rising up right now, making a big name for himself, and this is a good way to get him in the rankings. And for McGee as well, if he's able to get a win over Peyton Talbot, that's going to do wonders for him. That's a great win over somebody who is recognizable by fans. A lot of us believe in the talent of Talbot. I mean, that's such a fucking twister, but a lot of us do believe in the talent of Talbot. Not to say that he's going to go and become champion or some shit, but the dude is skilled on the feet, and we've seen him have some really solid defensive grappling as well. So, and that's perfect for a guy like Marcus McGee, who primarily is a striker, but we've seen that he's solid on the ground as well, and he's such a huge finisher. He brings forward a relentless pace. He's coming off a really good win over Jonathan Martinez, so he's riding a bit of hype right now. I think this fight would have such fun exchanges on the feet. I think we're in for a finish either way, and it's a really nice kind of entry to have right before you kind of kick off the main card. So I think that's the one to book it. So moving on up next to the main card opener, let's talk about Jeff Neal versus Carlos Prats. I know that after Carlos Prats knocked the fuck out of Neil Magny, I know that he was calling for JDM and Jeff Neal. I think JDM is being rumored to fight Leon next, so I think in either way, I think that's way too much of a fucking jump up. But regardless, I think this is a perfect fight that makes sense for both guys. It gives Jeff Neal somebody that's in the rankings, but it's a winnable fight for him. And it gives Carlos Prats a winnable matchup as well, but it's also his way to kind of get closer to that top 10 range. Now, I do think that Carlos Prats is a great talent. He's a very talented striker. He has so much power behind those hands, and I do believe in the hype, but I'm really curious to see what it's like when he's battle tested against these top 10 guys, because I'm a believer in Prats, but I am worried when I'm looking at him stylistically, worrying at him kind of about outside of camp. He's still smoking his cigs, bro, and you know what, man? You only get one fucking life, so fuck it, enjoy it. But still, I think that when he's going to get to those top 10 matchups, it's going to be a bit concerning for him when it comes to the grappling, when it comes to the cardio, when it comes to... It's not that Prats is bad at either of those things, but I think that Jeff Neal is a perfect test for him, because Jeff Neal is that perfect test to see if Prats really is worthy of being in the top 10 range. Because Jeff Neal's one of those guys who, he's the last guy to beat Bilal Muhammad, who is building up such an insane resume at welterweight. He's the fucking champion right now, but it's also the same guy that lost to Neil Magny. So Jeff Neal, I feel like if he could put everything together, I feel like he could become a really good talent at welterweight. Not that he's not already, but either way, I think that this fight would be an amazing way to open up the card. It's a good way to get the crowd all fucking amped up. It's going to be amazing exchanges on the feet, and this is another one where I feel like we're going to see a knockout from either or. I can't really see this one going the distance. It's exciting. It's winnable for both guys. It's a good test for Prats, and it's a good way for Jeff Neal to kind of build a win streak going. He's obviously coming off with a good win over RDA, so like we can keep the ball rolling now, you know? I think Jeff Neal has a lot of talent. I just think if he puts it to work and he really can apply the tools in the arsenal, I feel like he could, keep building up a good solid streak, and I think this is a great fight for both. So moving on, up next to Gilbert Burns versus Michael Morales. Now I know that Burns has been really wanting to kind of shoot for this Miami card. He wants the April return. Obviously Burns is a Florida man, so I think that this is a fight that makes sense. I think it's, I know that Burns also wants Kobe Covington around this time, and I can honestly see that fight totally taking place, but I'd honestly rather see Covington versus Ian Gary, or Covington versus even like a Strickland maybe. Here's the fucking thing, you guys. We're gonna find out who's the real motherfucking American here. But when you look at this one, I mean, I don't mean to just keep giving Burns up-and-coming prospects. He fought Hamza. He's just coming off of the battle with Brady, and he got smoked in that one, unfortunately. And I'm a Jarino Burns fan, so I don't want to just see him kind of keep putting over older prospects, because Gilbert Burns when he's going against a Morales or when he's going against a Sean Brady. I feel like those fights are very, very winnable for him a couple years ago, and I think he would get the better of either guy. But we're at this point where I think age is kind of really becoming a big factor for Burns. He's getting closer and closer to 40 each year, but at the end of the day, this still is a good matchup, and it is winnable for Burns because Michael Morales, he's very, very talented. He's very well-rounded. He's clean on the feet. He's good on the ground. He's just a well-rounded dude. He's versatile in there. But I feel like in the division of welterweight with all these prospects, the JDMs and the Shavkats, and like we were talking about earlier, the Carlos Prats, and even more, like there's so many of them taking over welterweight right now. Whether it be in the top 5, top 10, top 15, there's so many even lingering outside the rankings. So we're in a turning of the new age for that division specifically, and a few more as well, don't get me wrong. It just seems like the UFC, we're kind of turning into the new age. The new generation is kind of slowly taking over. The old heads are kind of working their way out. We're seeing the Usmans and the Wonder Boys and the Burns and the Covingtons, these guys who have kind of been around those spots or holding down those spots in the rankings for years and years for that division, and I think now they're kind of having to do the battle test thing. I do think it is winnable for Burns. While Michael Morales is very impressive, I do feel like comparatively to some of the other prospects, he's not quite there, but it's not all on him. He's very, very young. He's only 25 or 26, I believe, and he has all the room to keep improving. It's a good way for Burns to prove that he's still in it. It's a good way to kind of put some respect on Michael Morales because, like I said, all these prospects are being talked about. People forget, man, but everyone's kind of overlooking Michael Morales, so it's a good way to get him a win over a really recognizable name and somebody who has fought for a championship level. I mean, we saw what the JDM win did for, JDM's win over Burns. We saw what that did for him. It boosted him up to that next level, and now he's in serious talks of facing like the higher up contenders, and I think that'd be a nice kind of entry for Morales as well. Burns wants to fight at this Miami card. I think it makes all the sense in the world. But moving on up next to the featured fight of this card, Corey Sandhagen versus Deiveson Figueiredo. Now, I know all of us, or most of us at least, want to see Sandhagen versus O'Malley, but I'm really, really fucking afraid that they're going to give O'Malley an immediate rematch against Umar, or against Merab, or even if Umar wins, I could see them doing that, and they're going to try and build up a whole fucking Conor versus Khabib 2.0. I could totally just see them giving O'Malley an immediate rematch, which really does suck because there's so many good matchups for him. You could give him like a Henry Cejudo. Well, I just saw Cejudo got booked, but still, you could give him a Figueiredo, you could give him a Sandhagen, and all it takes, honestly, is one win. That's all we're asking. That's all we're asking, Sean. Just get that one win, but I think the UFC is just going to give it to him. So, Sandhagen versus Figgy, I think it's a fight that makes perfect sense for both guys. It's a perfect feature about to have. I think it's going to be a really exciting one, and we're going to see good exchanges on the feet. And also, Figueiredo is someone who's very well-rounded as well. We've seen good grappling him as well, and I think with Sandhagen's new and improved wrestling, offensively and defensively, it'd be interesting to see how that matches up against Figueiredo, because I could see Figgy shooting for some takedowns, and I could even see Sandhagen shooting for some takedowns, and it's a fight where it can get scrappy, but you can kind of see a little bit of everything. We could see fun exchanges on the feet. Hopefully, we kind of disappear a bit from the Nerdhagen days. He got a little too in his head, disappeared a little bit too much from the striking. I think that really, really hurt him in the fight against Umar. Relied a little bit too much on the wrestling, or was focused way too much on this in the camp. But I think that Sandhagen's going to learn from that. I think he's going to find that sweet spot in between where he's going to be able to still throw those insane flying knees and keep up such a high-paced tenacity and have such beautiful technique and precise striking on the feet, but also maintain a level of keeping it on the ground, keeping his opponent guessing. Maybe Sandhagen will shoot those takedowns. We've seen him do well on the ground against, like I just said, Umar, and he also was able to do very well against Vaughn, Cheeto as well. So I like the improvements that Corey's making in his game, and I think this is a perfect fight that keeps these guys both in the top 5, because if Sandhagen gets over a win over Biggie, it's huge. It's absolutely huge, and I think it's going to be able to keep him around that top 3 or 4 spot, whatever the fuck he is. And if Figgy's able to get a win over Sandhagen, especially as he's getting older and older, I think he just hit 37 years old, it's a way to still keep him relevant and show that after the yawn loss, that the momentum doesn't necessarily have to go away for Figueiredo, and that he's still able, to kind of still be in the title talks. Because if you get a win over Sandhagen, and then maybe one more after that, I could see Figgy getting a title shot, to be honest. If you really look at kind of the state of the division, who's kind of coming up next, who's got streaks going on right now. So Figgy right now, I think he's 2-1 or 3-1 at bantamweight right now. So if he gets a win over Sandhagen, it could be huge for him, and absolutely the same could be said for Sandhagen, because both these guys, I feel like coming off of these recent losses, they could use the momentum right now. Their stock isn't completely drained or anything like that. I think everyone's aware how talented they are and how deserving they are to be at that top 5 level, but this is a way they can kind of get back in the win column. It's a winnable fight for both. I feel like both these guys are going to throw everything at each other, and I feel like we'd see some really fun exchanges on the feet and just in general. So moving on up next to the co-main event for this one, Alejandro Pantoja versus Kai Kara-France for the flyweight championship. Now, I know that Pantoja's been eyeing an April or May return, and I know that they just put Cobb versus Royval, and all things indicate that Kara-France is going to be next for the strap, as little of fucking sense as that makes. I get that the Usyk win is a good win, don't get me wrong, and he did get robbed against Albalzi, but just, I'm sick of guys getting title shots just off of one fucking win, man. Now, granted, it is flyweight, so I'm not going to give it as much shit for as I would other divisions and other championships, but still, man, I don't know. I'm not super crazy about this fight. It's not a bad one by all means, don't get me wrong. Like, there are some really interesting aspects to it, like these guys fought once before on The Ultimate Fighter, and now they're here all these years later, and Kara-France is coming off an explosive knockout. Pantoja, I mean, this guy is a couple wins away from people really starting to take him seriously as the flyweight GOAT. I know some people are saying that he kind of already is, or is already one win away, but guys, relax, please. Since it's the title fight, we're pretty much going to be expecting next for this division, and since Pantoja's eyeing that April, May return, and since the next number one contender fight's going down in March, I feel like it makes good sense. That way, we can kind of get the winner of Royval versus Cobb around Pantoja versus Kara-France. Are going to be around the same timeline, so these guys could duke it out in the fall or the winter. So moving on, up next to the main event for this one, Ilia Topuria versus Alexander Volkanovski, the rematch. Now, we all know we're getting this fight next, and I think that the April-May range makes sense. Volk is very deserving. Don't get me wrong, all right? I understand why they're doing it, all right? And shout out Uncle Dana, but still, this just really isn't a fight that is super exciting to a lot of the fans. And Volk is absolutely, I'm not even fucking playing, he is my favorite fighter, so I don't mean to disrespect by saying we don't care about this fight, but guys, we really don't care about this fight, okay? I feel like a second win over Volk isn't going to do much for Topuria's legacy. Obviously, it'll move him up a little bit, but still. It is nice to see, though, we do have a fully fresh Volk. Like, I feel like the whole aura loss thing, we're getting closer and closer to kind of forgetting about that and realizing, hey, man, Volk is that guy, baby. Volk is that motherfucker, baby. Let's go. The chin is healed, and I feel like it'd be interesting to see if Volk, because Volk was looking good in that first round of their fight before, obviously, the brutal knockout, that totally AI, CGI, we're not going to talk about it. But if that Volk can go in there with a slightly better chin, you know, a bit more recovered, a bit more reamped, rejuvenate a little bit, if you will, I think we're going to probably see a bit more of a competitive fight this time around, and all that being said in account, Ilia Topuria, 4th round KO. All right, so moving on up next to UFC 315. Now, this one I feel like is heavily being talked about for Chicago, baby, my hometown. And they need to come back to Chicago, right? They're stacking the fuck out of Seattle, and it's not fair. So I think Chicago, and I've also been hearing just rumors in general, like they're eyeing that Chicago pay-per-view. So I believe that's where this one's going to be taking place. And when you see kind of the main and the co-main, I feel like it'll make a bit more sense. We kind of got some Chicago reps in there. But just starting off with the feature prelim, everybody's favorite forest dweller. This is literally the human definition of a wooden pickaxe. Bo Nickel versus Abus Magomedov. I think this is a good matchup. It's a good thing to have Bo Nickel finally just be off of a main card. I think it's less pressure for the dude. I think it's a way to get the fans just a little less pissed. Just put this guy in the fucking prelims already, dude. Or put him on a fight night or some shit, whatever, man. I'm so sick of these main card opener slots or these feature fight slots, man. Just let the dude build up. It's not even like he's a bad talent, but it's just, you're just throwing him out there in the spotlight that he just does not really need right now. And especially with all the shit he's getting from fans. So honestly, this is a fight though that I do think it's a good test for I do think it's a good test for Nickel, and I think it's winnable for both guys. Abus Magomedov is somebody who, he's very beatable. Like, there are clear holes in his game. He gasses out. He's very hittable on the feet, and I just think, but also Magomedov is at the same time, he's well-rounded, you know? He doesn't do, I don't think, anything super great in particular, but he's got solid grappling, he has solid striking, he's got solid power. And again, it's somebody who's kind of lingering outside the rankings and is coming off of a win, and it's something for Nickel to get some hype around if he is able to get the better of him. But I could totally see Magomedov taking this one. I think that's what makes it so interesting, because it's a fight where you go into it and it's not like Nickel's going to be like a minus 2,000 favorite. Like, there are going to be some questions. Like, Nickel does have a real shot of losing here, but if he doesn't, I think that's great, not only for the resume, not only for him. No, not that Magomedov on a resume is really going to do much, but just, it's a win over somebody who is very beatable, yes, but is going to present a lot of problems for him. Like, is Nickel going to be able to keep up with the striking on the feet? How is the grappling going to do against each other? I think it makes sense, and putting it as the feature prelim, I feel like it's just the right move. So getting into the main card opener for this one, Roman Kopylov versus Michel Pereira. This is a fucking striker spectacle. I know that Pereira just kind of got shut the fuck down by Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, and he just completely gassed out of there in one round. But you know what? This is a good kind of turnaround for him. It gives him a few months to kind of recover up, fix or whatever the fuck's going on in the game, kind of be able to build himself up to go past a round. And Roman Kopylov, I believe, is going to be able to beat Chris Curtis. I think they're fighting like this weekend. So after that, I think Roman Kopylov is kind of going to be deserving to kind of get an entry into the rankings. And I'm not saying just feed him somebody kind of in the top 10, but Michel Pereira right now is at that number 15 spot, and he's kind of on the fence where it's like, okay, is this guy just getting fraud shed? Like, is he just going out there and beating cans, and then when he gets against like more elite competition, he's just choking? Like, what's the deal? I feel like it's a good test for Pereira. It's a good way for him to get back on track, and for Kopylov as well, man. Such a fun kickboxer. And Pereira, I mean, both these guys are very, very exciting fighters. They're great strikers, but they do have holes in their game, and they're obviously not going to really try and take this one to the ground too much. I could see this kind of just going back and forth on the feet. I see this one definitely ending in a finish. I think it's an exciting way to open up the main card. It's a good way to get Kopylov kind of into the rankings, and it's a good way if Pereira is able to get the win on this one. It's a good way for him to show that he's not some fraud. It's a good way to kind of test who deserves to be there and who doesn't, and I feel like it's still an exciting fight, a good way to kind of get the card hyped up. So moving on up next to Curtis Blades versus the winner of Rozenstruik and Pavlovich. Now, all of this is being under the presumption that Blades is going to go out there and beat Kuniev at Seattle, okay? And if he doesn't, heavyweight is cooked. Heavyweight as fuck, dude. You might as well have Spivak beat Almeida at that point. The division could be cooked, bro. The fight with Blades versus fucking Kuniev at Seattle, it doesn't make any goddamn sense. They're doing it anyways. But Blades, he's a Chicago guy, and again, I believe that the card is going to be taking place in Chicago. And we don't have too many Chicago fighters, or at least a lot of recognizable names. But Blades is somebody who, if he's able to get the win over Kuniev, he's able to maintain that top 5 spot. And I say after that, you know, give him somebody who's actually around that range in the rankings. And I think the winner of Rozenstruik and Pavlovich makes all the sense in the world, because like Rozenstruik isn't going to get some title shot after that. Neither is Pavlovich, especially. He's 0-2 in his last 2. But this is a fight. 2 guys duking it out. I feel like either way would end in a finish. Blades is going to go out there, hometown crowd. Let's give Blades somebody who's not some fucking Dagestani jabroni, bro. And obviously I understand it's going to age like milk if he ends up losing, but still. Moving on up next to the featured bout for this card, Kamaru Usman versus Joaquin Buckley. Now, honestly, if you put this as like the main event for a UFC Fight Night Texas, I feel like that could also work perfectly as well. I know Usman wants that fight there, but in terms of this, I feel like this is the perfect fight to make for the number 1 contender spot, because if Usman's able to get a win over a guy who's young, hungry, on a good win streak right now, and he's beating Covington, Wonderboy, and more, and he's kind of building this shit up quick, I feel like the UFC would rather have these 2 guys fighting for the belt than like a JDM versus Leon. And no disrespect to either of those guys, but you know what I'm saying. Like, from the UFC's point of view, I feel like that they would want this fight to be the next number 1 contender fight. Buckley wants this fight, and Usman, I mean, now that they're talking about JDM versus Leon, I mean, who the fuck are you gonna give Usman? And where is this dude? We need him back. It's like, by the time that this fight goes on, he's already gonna be gone for a year and a half at this point anyway, so he's kind of got to either move to middleweight or kind of get the fuck after it, you know what I mean? Nice feature about to have. I understand if you do want to kind of have it as a 5-rounder, but then again, that's why I think if you wanted to kind of go the 5 rounds, maybe kind of put it as the main event of a fight night, but it's high stakes, it makes sense for both guys, and it's the next number 1 contender fight. And you know what? It's just it's a good test for both guys. Not to say that Usman even needs to be tested, but to see if he's still in it, man, because Buckley is becoming more and more well-rounded by the day. He's good on the feet, he's got good striking, he's got power behind those hands, he gets the fuck after it in that 3rd round, but he also has really, really solid wrestling as well, offensively and defensively. I mean, you put that against Usman, who's also good on the feet and good on the ground, you know, I feel like it's a great matchup, and one that a lot of fans want to see. So, moving on up next to the co-main for this one. Okay. So people on my channel know I usually don't really talk about the WWE shit, especially in kind of like some matchmaking, but I gotta include this. Juliana Pena versus Kayla Harrison, because I know that Juliana Pena, she fights out of Chicago. I know that she's not from there, but she does a lot of her training camps in Chicago, I believe. So this is the fight that we're getting next anyways, and I feel like timeline-wise it makes sense. And again, Pena trains out of Chicago, so fuck it. So yeah, let's just have that as the co-main. So moving on up next to the main event for this one, hometown hero Belal Muhammad taking on Shavkat Rakhmonov. We all know this is the title fight going down for the welterweight division next. Belal Muhammad has been talking about his podcast that the UFC's been eyeing a Chicago fight for May, and obviously I feel like that's where these guys come in. Hey, you know, I'm the real champ. You know, your guys' hate just makes me stronger, except there's not going to be any hate for this one. I'm the hometown hero. It's good enough time where Rakhmonov is going to be able to be done with Ramadan and train efficiently, and it's good enough time where Belal Muhammad Muhammad is going to be fully healed going into this one. He doesn't have to worry about the injuries. Timeline-wise, it makes sense. We all know this is the next fight for the division. And again, Bilal Muhammad, it's going to be a way where the crowd can get behind him a bit because he is from Chicago. So let's book it. And honestly, dude, I'd be excited for this. If I'm there live, bro, I'm bringing a poster for Bilal, bro. Fuck it. So moving on, up next to UFC 316. Now, I'm not sure location-wise where this one's going to be taking place. I don't know where they're going to be doing this one. So just no location for this one. But send location, brother. No location? Okay, that's fine. So starting off with the featured prelim for this one, Faraz Siam versus Benoit Saint Denis. Frenchman versus Frenchman. I think this is a perfectly winnable fight for both guys. It's a good way to get Faraz Siam into the rankings. And it's not somebody who, he's coming off a brutal fucking knockout over Matt Frevola. But it's also like he's not a big finisher in the first place. You know, Siam is a very kind of technical fighter, not a super big power puncher. And against Saint Denis, who's coming off of these two brutal losses in a row by finish. And also the fact that Saint Denis is ranked like 12 right now. It's still ranked 12 right now at the lightweight division. Let's test him a bit. Let's have him not fight up once again. Let's have him fight down, fight outside the rankings, see if he deserves to be in the rankings in the first place. These guys both just fucking destroyed Matt Frevola. Poor Frevola, bro. Jesus Christ. But it's a Frenchman versus Frenchman. Let's see if this is a good way for the UFC. You know, Gan is fucking making movies and shit. This is a good way to kind of have the UFC find out who's gonna be the next French star. Saint Denis doesn't have to worry about going and getting chinned or 10-8'd right away in the first round or something like that. It's a winnable fight for him, kind of to get some momentum back and put some hype back on his name. And for Siam right now, who's good win streak going right now, it's a good way to enter himself into the rankings. So let's find out who the real Frenchman is. So moving on, up next to the main card opener for this one, Jalen Turner versus Joel Alvarez. 100% finish rate versus 100% finish rate. This is a fight that fans have been really wanting to see. And man, we need this shit. 200% finish rate, man. A fantastic way to open up the card. It's a good way for Joel Alvarez to kind of move up into the rankings, but it's also a good way for Jalen Turner to prove that he still deserves to kind of maintain that spot. Joel Alvarez is such a well-rounded fighter, but obviously he's crazy on the feet, and I think that this is such an exciting fight, and it's going to be ended in a finish. Great way to get the crowd amped up. Makes sense rankings-wise. We just really need to see this shit, bro. Moving on, up next to the next one on this one, Gene Silva, presumably if he gets past the next opponent at UFC Seattle, but Gene Silva versus Dan Ige. So again, if and when Gene Silva wins at UFC Seattle, I think it's going to be time after that to kind of put him into the rankings. And Dan Ige makes perfect sense. He's ranked around like number 13 off the top of my head right now, I believe. So it's not like we're just shooting Gene Silva up and just giving him something crazy right off the bat just because he's riding a lot of hype. Like, it's a perfect fight that makes sense. I honestly do think it's winnable for Dan Ige. I know that if this fight was booked, Silva would be like a minus fucking 500 or some shit, but people forget, man. But Dan Ige, man, is really solid, and he was giving Lerone Murphy, bruv, he was giving him a lot of problems. Ultimately, Lerone Murphy won that fight, but it's not like Ige made it easy for him, you know? He was giving him a lot of adversity in there, and I think it's a winnable fight for Ige to maintain that spot. He really kind of built a name for himself at the UFC 303, all that shit that went down. So put him back on a pay-per-view against John Silva, who is one of the division's hottest fucking prospects right now. Obviously fighting out of the Fighting Nerds. It's a good way for him to get into the rankings. I feel like this is a fight where it's a good test for John Silva, because I don't think this is just going to be some walk in the park for him. And if it is, then that just goes to show how good John Silva is. I'm not just trying to make Ige some fucking gatekeeper, bro. I'm really not. But Ige's solid on the feet. He's got solid power behind those hands, and his wrestling is solid as well, man. So John Silva, it's a good test for him. Obviously, he's riding a lot of hype right now, so it's good entry into the rankings, or lack thereof. So moving on, up next to the featured fight for this card, we're going to be doing Robert Whittaker versus Cal Braujo. Now, I know that a lot of people would probably want to see this one go 5 rounds, and I think you're totally valid for that, but I really like this. It's just kind of like that featured slot for a pay-per-view. Obviously, again, if you want to put it as like a main event for a fight night or some shit like that, or maybe even like a co-main, I don't know, dude. I don't know if this is like pay-per-view co-main worthy, though. It is a fantastic fight, and it's definitely high stakes, especially on the Braujo side of things, because if he's able to get past Whittaker, you could argue, you know, I know that Hamzat is going to be up next. I know that Imavov is facing Adesanya. The whole number one contender situation is kind of figuring itself out. This isn't a number one contender fight, but it's a good way to show that Whittaker is still fucking in it. People forget, man, but Robert Whittaker is still young. He's still in his prime. He's like 33 or 34 years old. So this is a winnable fight for Robert Whittaker. I could totally see him going out there and not getting like a fraud check per se, because I do think Braujo is a good talent, man. You know, he He's got power on the feet. He's got good striking, you know, and he's also solid on the ground as well. We saw him get a nice submission over Alex Sejcek recently-ish. So, and Barajo right now, he's really starting to kind of come in his own, you know, and putting him on the same card as Gene Silva. You know, we got both the fighting nerds on there. Not both of them, like they're the only fucking two, but you know what I'm saying. Barajo is one of those guys. He's a really hot prospect right now in the division. He's a very well-rounded fighter, but I think it's a clearly winnable fight for Whitaker as well. Like, if Barajo comes into this fight, dude, and he's like a minus 300 or some shit, put some money on Rob, dude, I swear to God. Because even though Whitaker lost, you gotta realize, man, Whitaker has taken these losses before, you know, against the Chimaevs, against the DDPs, against the Adesanya's, but he comes back and he wins. I think that Whitaker only really loses to the very, very, very elite of the division. I mean, Adesanya, second best middleweight of all time. DDP's on top of the fucking world right now. Khamzat Chimaev, man, one of the most dangerous grapplers the UFC's ever seen. So if you're beating Robert Whitaker, you are legit as fuck, because you gotta look at each time that Whitaker loses, he's able to bounce back very well. Like, he goes on these mini win streaks each time. So it's a good way to test Barajo. It's a winnable fight for both guys. It's a good way to put Barajo on the map, and it's a good way for Whitaker to show that he's still in it. So how is Barajo striking going to be able to do? Is he going to be able to keep up the pace of Whitaker for all 3 rounds? Is he going to shoot a takedown? And if so, is he even going to be able to get him down? So we're going to have to just see. So moving on up next to the co-main for this one. BMF title on the line, baby. All right, Charles Oliveira versus Max Holloway, with Gaethje versus Hooker going down, and Poirier kind of figure out, I don't know what Poirier is going to be doing for the last retirement fight or whatever the hell, but Charles Oliveira versus Max Holloway, this is a banger, and honestly, it's a fight that makes all the fucking sense in the world. Look at where Charles Oliveira is at right now. I don't think he's going to be fighting Makhachev for the title. I know that, like, I don't want to see Oliveira versus Makhachev too. Like, if they end up doing it, it's fine. Like, it's a good scrap, and it'd be interesting to see how Oliveira does against Makhachev the second time, if he's able to properly make the adjustments. I know that we're kind of seeing a patient Oliveira right now, kind of coming into this new arc of his, but this is a fight, man, totally worthy of the BMF title. It's a great slot to have as a co-main of a big pay-per-view. 2 very, very recognizable names, 2 great names to get excited for the pay-per-view, and 2 men who are very, very worthy of that BMF strap. This is a winnable fight for both guys, and I'm so curious how Max Holloway is going to be doing after the loss to Topuria, because like I was talking about Whitaker earlier, like, Holloway is one of those guys where if you're beating Max Holloway, okay, I'm not talking about like infant Max Holloway when he was losing like McGregor and all that shit, like, if you're beating Max Holloway, you are legit as fuck if you're able to get past this guy. So Holloway, my whole point with this, is able to bounce back very, very well after losses. Despite Makhachev submitting Oliveira in his own game, and despite Topuria knocking out Holloway at his own game, everybody knows how good these two are, and everybody knows how high level of a fight this is. It's going to be interesting to see Oliveira's offensive grappling against Holloway's really, really good takedown defense. But again, BMF title strap, this is going to be a banger, and I would love to see this one go 5 rounds. I was like, when they made Oliveira versus Chandler 5 rounds, I'm like, dude, no way it goes to 5 rounds, man. But this one, I feel like whether we get a finish or not, it's going to be a guaranteed banger. These are 2 of the most exciting fighters on the roster, 2 big fan favorites, and again, putting it on the BMF title. And the BMF title, I feel like the fans have really come around to it, okay? Nobody's really like, oh boy, the fucking BMF strap. Nobody gives a fuck about this silver piece of shit. I feel like after the whole UFC 300 performance, I feel like it's really starting to kind of come around. Everybody kind of knows what it is. It's not exactly like championship level, but it's a good way to kind of get hyped up, and obviously if you're winning it, you ain't shit. So winnable fight for both guys. Stylistically, I feel like it's a fucking dream. So good way to get the crowd amped up, good way to kind of bring in pay-per-view numbers, and it's just a really, really exciting fight that makes sense for both guys, you know? I could see Oliveira winning. I could see him overwhelming him with the pace and the pressure, you know, and implementing the grappling in there, but Holloway I could see winning as well by just completely outboxing him and not letting Oliveira dictate where the fight goes. Both these guys are going to bring a high pace. It's going to be an exciting fight, and I think it makes sense. So moving on to the main event for this card, Pereira versus Ankalaev. I actually originally had Jones versus Aspinall here, and then I thought about changing it to Dricus du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev, but I feel like those 2 fights the UFC would save for like an international fight week or something like that, so I decided to go with Alex Pereira versus Ankalaev, because Pereira wants that March to June return, and I know that Ankalaev, you know, he's like been saying if the UFC does offer him a fight during Ramadan, he's probably going to just take it, and I can't blame the dude, especially looking at all the circumstances with this, but I feel like, I think it was Allah Abdiz that just came out. Did that even make sense, y'all? Allah Abdiz. The bald manager dude that everybody knows. He came out and he manages Ankalaev, and he pretty much said that Ankalaev's going to be next. So the whole Pereira ducking allegations or whatever, like, I do think that this is going to be the fight that goes down next. Timeline-wise, it makes sense because it's going to be after Ramadan, so Ankalaev is going to be able to have a good camp, and I know that Pereira or the UFC probably doesn't want that, but fuck it. It makes sense for him. And for Pereira as well, like I said, he wants that March to June return, and this is going to be in early June. soon. So, and Pereira, man, especially after the year he had in 2024, I feel like a few months rest, I feel like is very, very deserved. It's not like he's gonna lose all the fucking hype. Everybody knows how, everybody's really excited for this fight, and everybody knows how great Pereira is. It's a great legacy fight for him, because if Pereira is able to get past Ankalaev, the really big test for him grappling wise, I know that Blachowicz was supposed to be, but like, we all know that Ankalaev is the best grappler in the division, and he's gonna present just problems to Pereira that he really hasn't faced before. And if Pereira is able to beat Ankalaev, then holy shit, this dude's legacy goes up even more. And if Ankalaev is able to get the better of Pereira, I don't know. He's the champ. I don't fucking know. They'd probably just run it back in the fall or the winter or some shit. Hopefully, this is the right fight to make. This is a perfect pay-per-view to kind of have, or pay-per-view main event to have. And you don't have to kind of have Pereira just come in and save a card. You can actually kind of give him some time. We're going to prep this one up a bit. You know, he doesn't have to step up against Prochazka for the second time. He doesn't have to save the UFC 300 main event. He doesn't have to step up against Roundtree or whatever. Like, give both these guys time. Book it kind of for after Ramadan so Ankalaev can have a good camp. Again, I don't know if Pereira or the UFC wants that, so I could totally see this happen in like a March or April, but still. If any other title fight for Pereira happens after this, or it's not this, it's a disgrace. Fuck that shit. Again, location-wise, I don't know where the fuck 316 is going to be. But basically, in total, y'all, going back over this, UFC 314 in Miami, feature prelim Marcus McGee versus Peyton Talbot, Jeff Neal versus Carlos Prats, Gilbert Burns versus Michael Morales, Corey Sandhagen versus Davison Figueiredo, Alejandro Pantoja versus Cara France, and Ilya Toria versus Volkanovski 2. For 315 in Chicago, the feature prelim is going to be Bo Nickal versus Abbas Makhmedov, Roman Kopylov versus Michel Pereira to open up the main card, Curtis Blades versus the winner of Rosenstruck and Pavlovich, Usman versus Buckley, Pena versus Harrison as the co-main, and Muhammad versus Rakhmonov is the main event. And lastly, for 316, the feature prelim being Faraz Siam versus Benoit Saint Denis, Jalen Turner versus Joel Alvarez to open up the main card, Gene Silva versus Dan Ige, Robert Whitaker versus Cal Baraujo, co-main Oliveira versus Holloway BMF title, and the main event Pereira versus Big Ank. That is going to be it for the video. Let me know what you guys think of these matchups in the comments below. Do you love them? Do you hate them? Do I sound fucking retarded? Do these sound good? I don't know. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I would love to hear it. We're just here to talk some MMA. Thank you guys so very much for making it this far in the video. I appreciate y'all a lot for that, and thanks so much for the support. All the Smoke MMA, appreciate y'all a lot. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you all next time.